how would you try to get at the opposition to dealing with police violence as a real problem? And how would you get at the problem of the distrust in so much of our communities for police? And this will start, I think it's, yeah, Pam, Cheryl, Jim. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Cheryl, Jim, JP, Victoria, and Pam.
There was a police shooting a few days ago, and there was a young man by the name of Charles Hutchinson that was being aggressive with a knife, and he got shot by the police. And that was a huge loss to his family and his community. And there are many reasons why people act in aggressive ways, but when you're mentally ill, we need to be proactive in ensuring that you're cared for, especially in communities of color that suffer disproportionate aggression from police. Now, our chief of police talks about de-escalation and how well his deputies and all of the people that do meets all over Tucson are, but we see evidence all over the country, day after day, that people of color still face violent discrimination. And it is horrible to see and do nothing about it. So we have to be recognizing that this is an issue, even if it's not an issue for you. I think that it's relevant to say that I'm a member of the NAACP, and I stand in solidarity and allyship with all people of color from all different ethnicities. I think it's important as progressives to be intersectional and intend to work for every single cause that we fight for. And it's tragic that we experience so much violence. I'm having images of all of the different discriminatory actions that have taken people of color all over this past week. And I think that the only reason we know is because of social media. And so it's our responsibility to be aware of when it happens in our own community and stop it.
I think the larger question, this is a very valid question, and the larger issue is racism and implicit bias. Implicit bias is a term that we're hearing a lot of now, and a lot of people weren't really aware of it. And it has to do with understanding that you have a bias that you might not even be aware of. Is an implicit bias. And we see that not only with what's going on in our police departments across the nation, and yes, in Arizona. I don't know the stats, but I do know that Tucson does not get off easy on this one either. Even though I personally believe it may not be as prevalent here as it is in some other cities, I still think we've got a serious problem with it here. What we need to understand is a lot of what we're seeing today is people who are white calling the police on people of color. And as a Native American woman, I am Seneca and Mingo. I am very, very aware of how destructive racism is. Even from people that would swear up and down they don't have a racist bone in their body, but they would call the police on a person of color who was sleeping in a dorm. They would call the police or beat up an elderly woman who was driving a car and swerved into the other lane and gets dragged out. These are things that happened this week. They would call the police on 2 Native American people who were part of a school field trip just because they didn't look right. They didn't think they belonged. What's the issue? It's racism. What's the answer? So we all have to look at our part of it. This goes beyond the police department. It goes to every single one of us. We have to be more inclusive. We have to be actively inclusive.
I discussed this with my son, who's a deputy sheriff, has been for almost 18 years now. And he said it starts with training, and it starts with the individual. As far as the racism, he said, you can't train racism out of people. So he said that has to start with the department heads. That has to start with, in his case, that has to start with whoever the sheriff is. They have to let them know that it's not going to be tolerated. They have to let them know that as officers in that department, they're not going to be allowed to have racism. It's not going to be tolerated. And he said, you know, I said, well, what do you do about cases where the person is of color? And he said, Dad, it doesn't make any difference whether they're of color. He said, there's people being shot every day that are white. There's people being shot every day by police officers who are Native American, who are Hispanic, who are black. And he says a lot of times they'll say it's because they were incompliant. They weren't compliant with the police officers, and they showed a knife. So he said, you know, let's take the individual with the knife. Is that knife going to shoot a bullet at me? He said, I would just take the time and wear him down. And if I had to, I'd use my taser. He said, there's no reason to shoot him with a gun and kill him. We can deal with a knife. We can deal with a stick. We can deal with a rock. He said, I would never do that. And he said, that all comes from good training. And he said, I learned every bit of that going through the academy in Tucson. I learned how to do all of that in the academy. I'm well trained on that. And he said, you trained me not to be racist. And he says, I don't know how to get rid of the people that have racism within themselves, except the department needs to get rid of them.
Well, this is a very important question, obviously. I wanted to acknowledge that I believe that there is racial profiling in the Tucson Police Department. I had a friend who was stopped 3 times by TUSD, not TUSD, GPD, wrong initials, right? But he was stopped 3 times. He was a person of color, he had an accent, he had a green card. The 3rd time he was stopped. The first 2 times he was stopped, he didn't have a green card yet, and he ended up in Eloy, and he was there for a while, and he was also in Florence for a while. And so the 3rd time that he got stopped, he was riding a bicycle in his neighborhood on a side street after dark, minding his own business, and he was stopped by a Tucson police officer, a woman, and she went to great lengths. She turned his bicycle upside down to see, to run the ID number to see if he had stolen it. She asked for all of the contents of his wallet. She mustered 2 other cop cars trying to find a way to arrest this guy. So it's not just people getting shot, it's people getting hassled in the streets. So he told me about it. This was before I was in office. I called Steve Kazachek's office. I talked with Villasenor, and they're like, oh, just have him come in and make a complaint. I said, he's been stopped 3 times by the cops. There's no way he's going to come down there and make a complaint. Well, he should hire a lawyer. He can't hire a lawyer, right? And so there's no safe space for these people to complain when they are harassed. And so, again, I agree with Jim Love that is some training, but I think that there's quite a bit of work to be done. And again, it's not just about people getting shot, it's about people getting harassed and stopped. And in a liberal town like this, we shouldn't have this happening. So I think that there's more conversations that we have to have with the city government and the police department on what's happening here.